In the autumn of 1982, a retired radio technician named Gerald Marsh lay dying in a hospital bed in Albuquerque, New Mexico. His family gathered. His brother sat beside him. And then, in the final hours before he lost the ability to speak, he said something none of them had anticipated, something none of them could account for, something that, once spoken, changed the shape of everything they thought they knew about him. He told them he had been in contact with extraterrestrial beings he called the Greys, since 1961, 21 years, not one word. And the strangest part, he seemed unburdened. I want to start, not with Gerald Marsh the man, but with the night, October 3rd, 1961. That's the date his family pieced together from fragments, a notation in a pocket calendar, a gap in his work log his sister Frances noticed years later, a single sentence in a letter to a Navy colleague that no one examined carefully until after the confession. October 3rd, 1961. A Tuesday. Gerald was 34 years old, working as a communications technician at a contractor installation outside Socorro, New Mexico. He had been assigned to a radio telemetry monitoring project, the precise nature of which his family says he never fully described, even at the end. That night, according to what he told his brother Raymond in those final hours, Gerald was returning along a service road off Highway 60 from a late shift when his truck simply stopped. Not slowed, not sputtered, stopped. Engine dead, instruments blank, headlights off. He described the silence that followed as something outside his previous experience, complete in a way ordinary quiet never is, as though sound itself had been removed rather than merely absent. He sat without moving for what he estimated was several minutes, and then the light came. He described it as coming from above and to the right, a source of illumination his technician's mind could not map onto any known category. It did not behave the way light behaves. It was simply present, uniformly, in a way that eliminated shadow entirely. He described looking down at his hands on the steering wheel and observing that neither hand cast a shadow onto the other. He said he sat with that observation for a moment before he understood what it meant. That detail, the careful, instrumental registration of a physical impossibility, is the kind of thing that stays with me. It's not embellishment, it's notation. He got out of the truck. He said later he wasn't sure he chose to. Standing on that road, Gerald says he encountered two figures. Not one. Two. He described them consistently in those final hours, and in a partial disclosure his brother Raymond says Gerald made during a fever illness in 1974, which Raymond had attributed to delirium at the time, as roughly 4 feet tall, with proportions he described as considered. Large craniums, eyes that were dark and depthless, and, he said, patient in a way that unsettled him more than anything else. No audible communication, no visible mouth movement, and yet communication. Clear, structured, purposeful communication. Gerald used a word that Raymond has repeated to me carefully, each time with the same emphasis: landing. He said the communication felt like something landing, not arriving from outside, landing the way a bird lands, already committed to exactly that spot. Information, or something functioning like information, arrived without any of the mechanical infrastructure human communication requires. The encounter lasted, by Gerald's estimation, between 1 hour and 3. He could not be certain. His watch had stopped. When he finally drove back to his residence in Socorro, it was past 4 in the morning. His work log showed his shift ending at 10:15. The gap was nearly 6 hours. Gerald believed it was far less. That gap does not close when you look at it directly. It just sits there. Here is what the available evidence, fragmentary, imperfect, persistent, suggests happened after that night in 1961. Gerald Marsh did not try to forget. His brother Raymond, who spoke with him regularly by telephone throughout the early 1960s, noticed a change he described in a letter to their sister Frances as a new kind of quiet, not withdrawal, not disturbance, a quality of attentiveness that hadn't been there before. Gerald began to cancel plans, not frequently and not without apology, but with a pattern that Raymond says only became visible in retrospect. Always on short notice, always vague, always followed by Gerald being unreachable for 2 or 3 days. 4 such cancellations in the 14 months following October 1961. I want to be careful here. 4 cancellations prove nothing. But the deeper I moved into the timeline Gerald's family reconstructed, the more these isolated absences began to cluster. And clusters, in any investigation, are the thing you can't afford to ignore. By 1963, Gerald had relocated to a private communications firm in Albuquerque, working on the design and calibration of low-band signal detection equipment. According to records his nephew Thomas obtained through an archival filing in 2007, the equipment Gerald worked on was calibrated to frequency ranges with, at that time, essentially no commercial application. When Thomas attempted to obtain more specific technical records from the firm, long since absorbed into a larger defense contractor, he was told the relevant documentation had been transferred to secondary archival storage and was not available for retrieval, not destroyed, transferred, stored somewhere, accessible in principle to someone for some reason. There is a particular texture to that kind of bureaucratic language. Polite, technically precise, it forecloses inquiry without appearing to. And in my experience, that texture accumulates most densely around things someone made a deliberate decision about. What was Gerald calibrating in 1963? His family doesn't know, but they know what Francis found in a crawl space when clearing his house after his death. 3 handmade electronic assemblies built on boards Gerald had apparently fabricated himself. His nephew Thomas, who holds a degree in electrical engineering, examined them and described the components as inconsistently matched. Not incompetent, inconsistently matched, as though selected according to a different logic entirely. Thomas brought one assembly to a colleague at the University of New Mexico, who looked at it for some time and said it appeared to be a receiving apparatus configured for a frequency range he couldn't immediately identify. He said it wasn't a configuration he recognized from any application he was familiar with. He did not ask to keep it. Gerald Marsh was, by all accounts, a pragmatic man. His sister Frances describes him as careful. His brother Raymond says self-contained. Colleagues from the Albuquerque firm used words like methodical and exacting. He was not a man who reached for metaphor when a technical description would do, which is what makes the vocabulary he used in those final hours so striking. At some point during the contacts, which the family believes occurred at irregular intervals through the 1960s and into the 1970s, Gerald said the beings communicated something he spent years attempting to render in terms a human mind could hold. He described the communications as folded, not layered, folded the way a piece of paper contains both sides simultaneously, so that what is on one face is inseparable from what is on the other. Trying to extract a single clean meaning was like trying to read only one side without acknowledging the other existed. He said they communicated something about distance, not spatial distance, distance as an experience. He said they seemed to suggest that their relationship to what we call separation between places, between moments, between individuals was categorically different from the human version, that they did not experience the universe as discrete things arranged across an interval. He called it coherence, not unity. Coherence, the specific word a technician would use for a signal in which all components are synchronized. His family says he was very deliberate in choosing it, and this, he told Raymond that he did not believe the contacts were initiated solely by the beings. He said he had come to understand, not through instruction but through accumulated experience, what kind of internal state made the impressions accessible. Not a matter of reaching toward them, a matter of achieving a particular stillness in which something apparently always present became perceptible. He described it as the difference between a radio receiver that is on and one that is tuned. He had, in other words, learned to be tunable. Between 1968 and 1977, The external record of anything unusual in Gerald Marsh's life goes quiet. He was present, visible, functional. He went to work. He visited family. He is in the photographs from those years, usually composed, occasionally caught in a candid that Frances says always made her feel, looking back, that he was slightly elsewhere. Frances told me something Raymond confirmed independently. During the early 1970s, Gerald had reached a state she found difficult to describe without sounding as though she were describing something mystical, which she said was not her intention. She said he had achieved an equilibrium she had never seen in him before, as though he had made peace with something enormous and was now simply living alongside it. She said sometimes she would have the feeling, sitting in a room with him, that beneath the ordinary surface of his presence there was another layer of activity, quiet and continuous and inaccessible. She said she never asked. She wasn't sure she could have formed the question. Gerald's former colleague at the Albuquerque firm, a man named Harold Speece, who worked alongside him for nearly 7 years and whom Thomas reached through a retired engineers association, wrote in correspondence that Gerald had occasionally made remarks he had filed away as eccentricities. He recalled one specific moment, a morning break in the spring of 1966, both of them standing outside, Gerald looking toward the Sandia Mountains, when Gerald said without apparent context, "The frequency they use doesn't decay. That's the part we can't account for." Speece had asked what he meant. Gerald looked at him steadily for a moment, then went back inside. Speece said he had thought about that remark on and off for nearly 40 years. This is the part I approach most carefully. Gerald's deathbed account, as recalled by Raymond and Frances, and partially corroborated by a nurse who remained in the room and whom Thomas spoke with in 2009, included not just descriptions of the contacts but specific fragments of their content. Things impressed upon him that he had spent 2 decades attempting to understand alone. He said the beings communicated something about perception, specifically about what human beings believe they are doing when they observe something versus what they are actually doing. He said they seemed to suggest that observation is not passive, that the act of perceiving something participates in configuring what is perceived. He found this unsettling not because it was strange, but because it sounded, to his technical mind, less like philosophy and more like physics. He said they communicated something about the scope of their activity. Not the details, those were not shared with him, and he did not believe they were his to know, but the scale. A persistent impression, across multiple contacts, of something vast and patient and ongoing, measured not in years or centuries, but in something he had no unit for. He was aware he represented one point in a much larger configuration of contacts. He did not know the shape of the configuration. He had the sense that a single point within it could not perceive the whole. He said they communicated something about why he had been found initially. His work with signal detection equipment, the specific bandwidths, the calibration methodologies he had been engaged with in 1961 had produced a discernible signature. He had, without knowing it, been making a kind of noise in a spectrum they were attending to. He used the phrase "an open window." His technical work had been, from their perspective, an open window. He hadn't known it was there, but something on the other side had noticed the light. I want to be precise about what Gerald's family experienced after the confession. They did not disbelieve him. That is the first thing that struck me. The instinct might be to expect dismissal, a dying man, perhaps medicated, saying something his family charitably attributed to deathbed confusion. But that's not what happened. Raymond describes Gerald in those final hours as more lucid than he had been in weeks, organised, deliberate. When Frances asked him directly whether he was certain, whether it was possible he had misunderstood his own experience across 21 years, he considered the question before answering. He said, "I have misunderstood many things. I don't believe I misunderstood this." His nephew Thomas spent 15 years afterward doing what most people never get to watch happen, quietly building a record, not publishing, not broadcasting, filing information requests, corresponding with archivists, driving to Socorro. He tracked down Harold Spiess and the University of New Mexico engineer and the nurse. He assembled a file that runs to several hundred pages and that he has not shared publicly except in limited portions with me. He worries, he says, that the public frame for a story like this one is too loud, that the specific details, the service road off Highway 60, the word landing, the open window, what Gerald said looking at the Sandia Mountains, lose their weight the moment they are set beside every other account that has ever circulated about contact with non-human beings. That specificity is the first casualty of the broader conversation. He might be right. There is a category of evidence investigators rarely discuss because it resists quantification. I'll call it the evidence of character. Not the absence of documentation, though that matters. The absence of the kind of person Gerald was from the kind of story he told. Gerald Marsh was not, by any account, a man given to fantasy. He did not read science fiction. He showed no documented interest in the paranormal before or after October 1961. His bookshelves, according to Francis, held technical manuals, regional history, and paperback mystery novels. His correspondence deals with practical matters, work, family logistics, the occasional dry observation about weather or local politics. He was not primed for this story. He did not arrive at it through a culture of belief. He arrived at it through a Tuesday night on a service road that disrupted the otherwise orderly trajectory of a careful technical mind. That disruption became the organizing principle of his inner life, hidden from everyone who loved him, carried alone for 21 years, released only when there was nothing left to protect. Why protect it? What was he protecting it from? And who or what was he protecting it for? I have spent a long time now with the account of Gerald Marsh. I have read the portions of Thomas's file that Thomas permitted me to read. I have looked at photographs of the components Francis found in the crawl space. I have read Harold Spiess's correspondence. I have thought about the light that cast no shadows on a service road off Highway 60 on an October night in 1961. I am not prepared to tell you that Gerald Marsh communicated with extraterrestrial beings for 21 years. I am not prepared to tell you that the Greys exist, that they are conducting a patient and distributed project of contact across decades, that certain technical work produces signatures visible to non-human perception. I am not prepared to tell you any of that, but I am not prepared to dismiss it either, because the pattern that emerges from the evidence, fragmentary, imperfect, resistant to clean conclusion, does not look like the pattern of a lie. It looks like the pattern of a secret.